right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is the First Generation Podcast. I am your co-host, Kwabena Adu. Partner in crime, Mr. William Valencia. William, say what's up to the people.
What's
up to the people?
Going on.
This is the First Generation Podcast, and here you're going to find authentic conversation with real people about topics that matter. So today's topic, we're focusing on part 2 of our series, which is From Maleness to Manhood, and we're focusing on the soul, specifically spirituality and creativity, and how it affects African Americans, as well as specifically just Black men. So our guest today, our first guest is Mr. Terrell M. Harris. He is a graduate of Norfolk State University and Wesley Theological Seminary. His pursuit of self-mastery led him to become a certified personal trainer, a youth exercise specialist, and a sports nutrition consultant. He's also a 3-time marathoner. He's a former college athlete. When I met him, he was my 2 guard. That was our Michael Jordan.
Listen, I'm only 5'9", first of all.
He's also a terrific dad to a beautiful son, Tamir. He's also a producer / beat miner. I listen to Tidal. I only push Tidal, but I think you're on all streaming platforms right now, correct?
Yeah.
And that's Rel 77. He has about maybe like a collection of 4 or 5.
4, actually 5. The 5th one goes up tomorrow. I didn't
yeah.
out yet, but yeah, I'm
definitely got to check that out.
Yeah. So this is Terrell Harris. Let's give it up for Terrell.
Appreciate you guys, man.
All right.
Thanks for joining us, man.
Our second guest, known this man for a very long time. Man of God, an actor supreme. The running joke between me and him is that when he invites me to the red carpet, I'm going to be the one that people are going to interview. I'll be like, I've been waiting for y'all to pick him up. This is the guy. Mentor, wonderful educator, father to 2 beautiful daughters, husband, my brother, Mr. Douglas Scott Streeter. Say what's up to the people.
How you guys doing?
All right.
Hey, that's a nice closet, man. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Hey, man, that closet is pretty.
Acoustics, man. We got a few things in here.
Got a tutu?
Halloween costumes already back there.
So. See how you covered it up? Halloween costumes. Okay, we'll take that. All right, to start, I want to hit you guys with an excerpt. So it's from a book called Black Spirituality and Black Consciousness by Carlisle Fielding Stewart III. And the excerpt is from his first chapter, and he kind of gives us a definition of what Black spirituality looks like. So he pretty much sums it up in 2 essential elements: shape and compel African American spiritual belief and praxis. The creative soul force and resistant soul force. He goes on to say that at the heart of Black existence in general is a movement of the spirit that creates values and sustains its own soul force and culture soul. So the creative soul force is the spirit of creativity that forges and fosters culture as a means of constructing and transforming reality. And resistant soul force is the power that thwarts the complete domestication of the spirit for purposes of subjugation, domination, and annihilation. A lot of heavy stuff to unpack in terms of that definition. So I put it out to the guests and my co-hosts. Does that definition pretty much sum up African American spirituality right now in 2020? And anybody could jump in. Go ahead.
I mean, let's go with Terrell first, since Terrell is, he's done the seminary study and he is autistic, right? Let's hear that brother's rendition on that.
Man, it's challenging, right? Here's one thing I'd say, right? For me, the pandemic kind of I don't want to say it kind of boxed me into a certain way of feeling, but let me just establish this, right? So in terms of spirituality and creativity, right? Um, I feel like there's several things that kind of put us in the box in the American system, if you want to call it that, right? So we're kind of actually, I think we're fed what African American spirituality looks like. Excuse me, we're fed what it's supposed to be. Like for me, I was raised um, Black Christian, African Methodist Episcopal Church. That's the foundation of my faith. But what started to unravel for me, especially with this 45 presidency, is what white supremacy was doing to actually impact not only my spirituality, but then also my creativity. So, and also having a 4-year-old son, I then began to notice what type of imagery he was being fed in terms of what he could actually become, right? Because we look at TV, advertisement, cartoons, whites are kind of fed this superhero mentality. Like they could do anything, they could have a cape, overcome anything, and then we kind of struggle for any type of imagery, right? So for me, it took a lot of unraveling and digging into different books. I've been looking at like Dr. Naeem Akbar, a whole bunch of stuff. So I had to kind of redefine what my spirituality was in the context of being underneath like a white supremacist umbrella, right? So for me, I'm still kind of redefining what this spirituality is, right? Because typically when we say African American spirituality, at least from my perspective, we always think Black church, right? So what I had to think about is what actually happened prior to slavery, what was going on in West Africa, what type of things they did, because even while I was in seminary, we touched on they skipped past a lot of stuff because of course it's not really designed to go into Black spirituality, right? So we would touch on little topics like maybe things like voodoo or voodoo, and then we skirt past it. But in my research and kind of unraveling things like that, you find out that West Africans actually believed in a monotheistic system, which is the belief in one God, right? And then you also find that things like voodoo or voodoo was demonized, right? So I say all that to say that going through seminary, I thought I had it, right? And that actually was just the beginning for me to figure out this whole spirituality piece as a Black man, because it gave me the freedom to then explore, right? So now I have the foundation of Christianity. I know church history, understand how the Bible was formed and all that stuff like that. So I understand that. So I took that and was like, well, now I can explore over here because no one really could tell me about all this other stuff because I already know it. Like I've been through the system. So for me, it's still I'm still exploring what that actually means for me, especially like I said with having a kid and trying to understand what the foundation spiritually is going to be for my son, because I don't want it to be the same. I think I have an advantage because I've gone through seminary, so I don't want to give him that same foundation and then him have to unravel stuff when he's 30, right? In terms of the creative piece, I think creative piece and spirituality, I think for me, the creative piece ties directly into the freedom to explore, to do different things, and not necessarily be pigeonholed in a particular box. Now, the challenge we get as African American men or African American in general is when we explore outside this already established box, then there are certain Black Christians who are, they sit back and they kind of frown on us, or they look at us like, that's unbiblical, but not understanding like the foundation of what we actually believe was it was kind of driven home to us through slavery. Now, our ancestors who were slaves actually did a great job of taking what they had and using it for their advantage. But at least from my perspective, I think some things were lost to tie us back to the roots of what we were actually doing prior to even the introduction of Christianity into, Western Northern Africa.
Okay, that was dope. Mr. Streeter.
Yes, sir.
Tell us how that excerpt made you feel. What'd you get from it?
It's it brings a lot of things home, and it also brings some understandings to some things that I've seen and witnessed. For instance, it brought back a memory to me of I had the luxury and the blessing to last year do a show at LSU University, Louisiana State University, and as we all know, their mascot is the Bayou Bengal tiger, and across from their stadium, Death Valley, there is a sanctuary where Mike the tiger, which is the school's mascot, resides. And he has, area has a pool area and everything. And one of my co-stars and I were there walking by there, and he said, "You want to understand what, man, in America? It's Mike the tiger. That's what it is."
Right.
There is this animal, this majestic creature who has been born to be a ruler, born to oversee, born to roam and create new life and preside over a domain in the wilderness, to be free. And here he is. He has the ability to provide for himself. He has the ability to do everything he needs for himself. But yet he is confined into a box as to what he's supposed, how the university sees him. And so, much like Mr. Harris, I have an understanding of Christianity, and when we say Black Christianity, we automatically think the Black church. But as you and I, Ms. Valencia, were discussing earlier, Christianity, there were Africans who were worshiping Christ long before it was established in Rome, long before Constantine got a hold of it.
Mhm.
And for me, spirituality is based on the relationship. You got to have the personal relationship, whatever that looks like. The relationship you have with the Creator yourself, that you define. As long as you have that relationship, it's fine. But there is that challenge. There's that challenge of the idea of what it's supposed to look like as opposed to what it is. It can be stifling at times because it outcasts us in a society where we're already seen as outcasts.
Mhm.
We're outcasted amongst our own because of that, because of the stringent, parameters of what it is to be. So that brought that to me, and that creativity of how that is challenged. I had the pleasure and the luxury of growing up in the South during the 80s, 90s. So there are challenges that I faced where, I was stifled. My creativity or my ability was stifled because the society saw it better to invest in the young white male as opposed to the young Black male. And so that in itself is a bridle that's put upon your creativity, your ability, your spirituality, all of those things. So it brought a lot of that statement is partially correct. Hearing that definition and how he defined it is painfully correct. in some instances.
I want to touch on what you and Terrell Douglas talked about in regards to the dichotomy between being creative, being spiritual, and not trying to tie spirituality and religion. But again, most of the time when we're talking about African American spirituality directly connected to the Black church, eliminate people who are Muslim and people who are Hindu, and right. My earliest recollection is going to church with my mom, literally up the street from my apartment building, and it was a Pentecostal church, and I remember, you know, when my mom reconnected with the church, she would drag us to church, right? Because that's what you did, and I always would just begrudgingly just like, man, it's Sunday. I just want to go to the park. Like, I gotta go to school tomorrow. I don't know if I can do, right? And if you've ever been in a Pentecostal church, you know, like,
Go for hours, bro.
All day, baby.
You're gonna sing. You're gonna sing to be there all day.
Yeah,
you're
all
gonna
day,
be there all
baby.
day. And I remember going, just like sitting in the back, right? Because one, I didn't sit with my mom, and two, that's where all the kids were, right? So the kids were in the back, or they had like a separate room for the kids, and you go into the room and the adults, right? But I just remember music, right? And music being kind of the driving force to kind of pull you into church, right? When I was able to kind of sit with the adults at a certain point, I would recognize, man, there's a lot of women in this church, right? And I always wondered, like, you know, where are the younger males right now? At that time, you know, I'm hanging out with my friends, and I know they're not going to church because I don't see them in the church, right? Which made me not want to go to church. But I always wondered, what was it that just kind of pushed young Black men out? What pushed men in general kind of away from spirituality a lot of times, which kind of adds to the disconnect. A lot of times you won't find, especially in those older churches, you won't find a lot of young people in those churches. Because of some of the traditions that are kind of like set in stone, right? And, you know, Terrell, when he was talking about the idea of being creative and it being frowned upon, it made sense because I was a kid who loved hip hop. And I didn't know the hymnals. If you were to package that a certain way, I was in. Yeah. But there was no room for that, right? Not until later, you know, you have like people like Lecrae, and maybe got some like church spiritual references through like Bone Thugs, but that was about it. Like, you didn't get, right? So it further creates this kind of like divide and gap with not just young people, but also with Black men, because it didn't feel cool. And it also felt like you were being hustled, right? Because how many pastors were hustling?
Oh my goodness.
Right? Yeah. Like, what was his name? Reverend Knight.
Hey, if you go back and listen to what Reverend Ike is actually saying, though, man, it's not. I don't know what he was doing then, but in terms of listening to him now, he's not far off. But we'll touch on it now.
No, that's cool. I just, you know, and you know what? Maybe not Reverend Knight, but you know, I just remember you gonna sell me a prayer cloth? Like, yeah. It just felt like a hustle. So like, you know, you already trying to get 10% out of me. Now you want to, right? So
Yeah.
those are all the, right? Those are all the stigmas, those are all the things that prevent, I think, Black men from entering the church, right? And then on top of that, it doesn't feel youthful
No.
because you're not allowing the youth who you want to fully participate, fully express themselves with guidance, right? Because you let young people do whatever, they're gonna run amok with it, but you still need that energy to kind of keep it
Right.
going. Can we talk a little bit more about that? More of your own personal experiences with church, and then touch on a little bit the hiding of certain truths.
I like to speak to
That's
that
deep.
because
Okay.
I like to speak to that because when Mr. Harris was talking about how he saw the hidden, or he saw the Vundum being passed over, and maybe it was spoken about, but it kept moving. So for me, a real good friend of mine, he's a santero, practice santeria, and I've had conversation about how there would be the Santeria idols under the table, underneath the tablecloth, but then the Catholic idols on top of the table, right?
Wow.
So the Africans would hide their worship inside the Catholic relics.
Wow.
Or if you go into a botanica and you see these white faces, these Catholic, dolls but we had to hide our prayer wrapped inside of there so that, and just to, and for me, it was sort of the same thing, right? I'm just like Mr. Harris. I'm in a space where I question some of those things, and I started, I'm not a fan of religion, but I mean, the world, I get a cut and it heals, and I didn't will it to happen. It just happened, right? I don't know how these things happen. I don't know how that plant produces, oxygen, and I produce, carbon dioxide to feed the plant. I mean, that cycle that's bigger than me. I'm not that bright. So I know there's a higher power. And speaking with, with my friend who's into Santeria, he, all the essences, the idols that they worship are essences of nature.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it made sense to me, because you start talking about these essences of nature, and that's God, that's the world, that's everything, the water, the air, the land. And I started, to me, that just made sense. When you tell me that this mystery happened here, I mean, again, being a Black man, we can't, I mean, I could take the word of something that's here because it's there, right? The chair is there. I believe in that chair, and I can't believe something that's not there, because I don't have that luxury as a Black man to, to hopefully believe something that's going to happen. This American dream, right? That we were told is possible. So now I don't know if that played into my thought process, but it may have. And then just me seeing things that felt tangible, I mean, intangible. I mean, yes, I do breathe air. Yes, there is sunlight. Yes, there is water. Yes, there is land. So now when someone's telling me, yes, we're praying to these essences, and when you start talking about the indigenous man and how they did that, right? And when we start looking into island people and how, and they prayed to nature. In most places, we start looking at ancient prayers and how they prayed, and they were praying to nature, which to me is God.
Right.
So those things brought me closer to that. So it brought me away from religion and just, spirituality, because, and, for me, I started looking at, let's say, I don't believe that we transcend to a heaven or a hell. I think you live in it, right? I think that if you live in your nature, using the talents that God has given you, you're in your heaven. And I think that if you're chasing nurture, if you're chasing what man has told you you're supposed to do, you're living in hell. So I don't believe that we transcend to another plane. I believe that we're energy, and energy doesn't dissipate. So I believe that we're going to be reincarnated. Listen, I'm trying to live my life great so I could be reincarnated in something greater. I'm trying to be an apex predator. I want to be a shark in my next life. So I'm out here trying to do my thing.
You can't swim. You can't swim. How you gonna be a shark? You gonna be a shark. You can't swim, man. But that's at the core too, right? Like, you know, is there room to explore other ways of spirituality, right?
We get frowned upon, don't we?
Say that again.
Don't we get frowned upon when we don't fit into the box and just agree with them, right? I don't, like, okay, listen, okay, so you my brother and you go to church, right?
Absolutely.
Do I go with you to church when I'm around?
Absolutely.
So I go there because love is love, right?
Absolutely.
So I'm going there loving up my peoples, just to love up my peoples, no matter what, right? Because I respect how someone else prays. Hey, that's, you know what? And at the end of the day, you have to look in the mirror. You have to appreciate those things and feel good about yourself. And to me, God is love. So I'm gonna love up my peoples and love up what they do. And as long as it's beneficial to them and they love it, I can't help it but love it as well.
Is that everybody's feeling on that? On, like, no matter what path of spirituality that you take, love is love, God is God, that's how it works? Or do we have variations to that?
I was gonna say, I think for me, man, like you have to be exposed to that. It has to be a purposeful. You have to get purposeful exposure to that. Otherwise, you're really just going to be systemically placed in a particular lane, right?
Right.
So, for those of us who hadn't had the opportunity to go to the seminary, right? So, what it does really, right? Because there's a ton of historical stuff that you don't learn in church. Everything. So, what it really does is it forces you to unpack all of your beliefs, because what you're learning, what you're taking is going to break everything down. And then you have to reformat that stuff through like a class called systematic theology once you graduate, right? But for me, like what really did it, because I kind of was always on the fence, like there's all these religions. I think the only way to truly know and understand the aspect of what God potentially is to understand all religion. Like, so I already had that foundation just from being in like, high school and high school and middle school, junior high school, right? So, but one particular class is what set it off for me, right? So it was a world religion class that we required to take. So in this world religion class, we are placed in an environment we have to interact with other religions. So Muslim community, Buddhist community, Hindu community. And to see that they were kind of so welcoming of us in their worship space, like I said, I was already leaning that way anyway. And that took off for me. So for me, I still could go to church. Any environment I find myself in, like if I was going to be there full time and this was going to be my church home, or if I was going to create it, it has to be interfaith, right? Because these are the only, in an interfaith community of all faiths, the only communities that we could be in where our thought process is going to be challenged. We're going to learn something, and everything we see isn't the same, and there's not groupthink, right? So if you're around a Black conservative Christian and that's all you're being fed, guess what? Chances are, if you hadn't experienced anything outside of that realm, that's what you're gonna be. For me, since I kind of experienced that, there's no going back into it, right? So for me, it just makes, from my experiences, it makes more sense to be in an interfaith environment welcoming of all faiths. But I can't, as much as I want to condemn and get other people out the matrix, it's kind of hard because I don't want to say they've been indoctrinated, but that's just how they were born and raised. So, but I agree. Like for me, I combine religion, science. So like I truly believe that we're energy and you can't destroy energy. So that energy is going to be someplace, whether it's going to come back, whether it stays in the universe. So I have similar beliefs to that as well. So it was like I had these Christian beliefs and things that kept getting added on little by little, mainly because Maybe because of my upbringing, I was just raised to be more open, or I always had questions. So when you ask these questions, and depending on how you search, like it opens your mindset or your realm to infinite possibilities.
Doug, so I've known, one of the things I'm always amazed by you. You always ask these questions. How did I always imagine how you were as a young person. How were you allowed? Were you given the space in the room to ask these questions when you were younger? And if you were, right, explain that experience. And if you weren't, explain that experience as well.
That was me.
Your name is Doug.
Oh, I didn't hear the Doug part.
Yeah, that's for you, brother.
So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I had an interesting collective growing up with. So my grandparents on my mother's side, grandmother went to the 4th grade. My grandfather went to the 3rd grade, I think. Grandfather was a brick mason. My grandmother was a homemaker. So that's my mother's side of the family. My father's side of the family, both of my grandparents were college graduates. My grandmother had a master's in classical music. And my grandfather had a master's in industrial science. So there was always this kind of blend of enlightenment and down home religion, so to speak. My grandfather, who was a brick mason, was also a pastor of a little church up in Patrick, South Carolina. You will never go to Patrick. There's no way. If you go to Patrick, I'll be surprised. But
is that like Monk's Corner?
Yeah, dude. Man, listen. Man, listen. But so I had these two different approaches that I was constantly exposed to. My creative side, my grandfather, my grandmother on my father's side, of course, her being a musician, and was really a big push to explore the arts, explore your creativity. We created a safe space for you here to explore those things, to look in those things. Let's go paint. Let's go play music. Let's learn the piano. Let's sing by the piano. So it was always this openness towards my creativity from my father's side of the family. And my mother's side of the family was those hardcore principles, hard work and discipline and those things. So I had I heard Pastor Bernard. I was a member of, when I lived in Brooklyn, I was a member of Christian Cultural Center in Canarsie, Brooklyn. And Pastor Bernard talked about sometimes God brings you from one end of the spectrum to the other end so you can find that space in the middle. And so I found that space in the middle, and through my journeys in life, I met people of all different faiths, and some of the most welcoming, much like Brother Harris said, some of the most welcoming and open people were of different faiths. Whereas in certain instances amongst my own so-called people of faith, Christians, I've caused some resistance. I've caused some heavy resistance from people who claim to be Christians. So, I did have that ability to kind of move between those two things and find that comfortable medium. My faith is based on my personal relationship with Christ. What that looks like, it could change week to week as far as I want to be able to talk to Christ at a moment's notice, that doesn't have a full structure. It's I wake up and God, I'm having a tough time today. Just that openness. So that's what my spirituality looks like. Now, if we look back in the Bible at Jesus, you know, he hung out with tax collectors, and you know, he hung out with everybody. The rigidity of these things, that the Pharisees and the Sadducees, so to speak, he wasn't about those things. He was about sitting and talking with people of all different approaches, and trying to talk and find a connection. So studying that and understanding that, you know, that kind of made me open to have conversations with people, to not condemn, and just have a talk and treat them as a blessing. Try to be a blessing to people, and not a curse. Sometimes that blessing is hard. Sometimes it's an easy blessing, but trying to be a blessing. I think to go to a point that you asked about a little earlier, about what you think may be pushing. You don't see a lot of males in the church there, and I think that goes back to that Mike the Tiger thing, man. I think at some point, young black men in particular, kind of have an understanding of their ability and their power, but don't have the capacity to understand how exactly to apply that. And so once you start trying to put parameters and boxes around, and this is how you have to perform, this is what you need to do, I think that scares a lot of young black men away. Challenges of being on this rigid path, this rigid structure, pushes them away. And a lot of times, for instance, mentioning something you guys discussed earlier, you kind of see who's the pastor of the church, and you may remember them when. And then it becomes hard to understand that this guy is saying, I shouldn't do this and shouldn't do that. And 5 years ago, I knew he was out there doing this and that. So those are all challenges, I think, that come to the forefront and kind of make it difficult as a young man to decide to take on. I mean, it is tough. Last thing you want to do, I used to go to church, much like you mentioned, to do every Sunday. And then I went to college and I didn't go to church for 3 years. You know?
All right.
For 3 years, I didn't go to church. 3 years straight, I did not go to church.
You straight away, heathen.
I'll be that. But I had to come full circle. Like I said, God gives us these opportunities to hit one end of the spectrum all the way to the end and bring you back to balance in the middle. And I think that's what it's all about, finding that balance. Understanding your nature, understanding your relationship with Christ, and finding that balance. What that looks like, it may be different for every person, but finding that balance is paramount.
So, brothers, I have a question. Mr. Harris, I'd like you to address it first. My question is being autistic, do you think as a black man that has been a coping mechanism for us?
Absolutely, man. Like, listen, man, here's what I'd say, right? For me in particular, let's just say the music piece, right? So for me, I've always been involved in music. I think my mom played an instrument. So, back in the 80s, being in New York, music was a part of education, right?
Right.
So I always had an interest in drums, trumpet, and stuff like that. So I played all the way up until I got to high school. Now, Max, you remember our high school band was kind of trash. So my ego set in, and I'm like, you know what? I'm new here, freshman, 9th grade. I'm not trying to do anything to mess up my coolness. you won't see me with the band. But my love for music and my love for hip hop and music never really dissipated, right? So for me, I always just kind of made music just as a hobby, coping mechanism. It was a de-stressor. But like I'll say this, like for real, in terms of the pandemic, like because I'm kind of an extrovert. I like being around people. I don't necessarily have to, it's more so about energy. I get energy from crowds, right? So like literally having, just my wife and my son and us not really risking too much stuff in terms of being around people. Like my creativity in terms of music has been off the charts. Like I hadn't worked this much or been this creative ever, right? So when I talk about, yeah, when we go back and talk about like connection, like there's two things for me right now, right? My connection to the high power God, Jesus Christ, whatever, however you want to frame it or name it, for me, it's definitely been through music, and it's the other piece is basketball. So like when I step on the court by myself, there's something meditative about just being on the court, or even when I run and exercise, when I do certain things, that for me is become a spiritual practice. So it's not necessarily praying, meditating, reading the Bible, and doing things like that. Like creativity, exercise has for me, especially during this time, has definitely been spiritual. Hands down. Yeah.
That's your nature.
What did you say, Will?
That's your nature.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
Mr. Streeter, let's, how do you feel about, your, autistic, the autistic side being a coping mechanism?
It definitely is, man. And not only is it a coping mechanism, it's also a learning mechanism and a healing mechanism. From the standpoint of, I heard a artist once say to me, another actor say to me, the work finds you when you need it to find you in your life. And what he meant, I started thinking about that, and that's actually true. That's true for my life in that case. A lot of the work that I find that I have to do study on or rehearse on or research on, I see myself or an issue that I'm dealing with that I get resolved by doing the show. For instance, my father, growing up, was an alcoholic. A lot of issues. My mother never divorced my father until after I left and went to college because of her faith in God. She didn't want to be seen as, a woman who was divorced and her husband because the faith, the Christian United Methodist faith. But she went through so much, and I sat and watched that, and a lot of times I had a lot of anger towards my father. And going off on my own, freshman in college, the first show I ever got cast in, play I ever got cast in, was Fences by August Wilson. And I was playing Corey, and that play revolves around the relationship between Corey and his father. Mm. And so doing research and reading and talking to the gentleman who was playing Troy Maxson, who was the main character in the show, made me really take a look at the relationship I had with my father. And to look at my father as a human being and to look at the challenges that he faced. And it allowed me to cope. It allowed me to have conversations with my father that I'd never had before because of the exploration in the work for the role and understanding the relationship with father and hearing in the story the life of Troy and what he had gone through and how his father had tried to rape a little girl and he stopped his father and his father beat him up so bad. He got up from that point and knew that he couldn't go back home. And he went out on his own and he was 13 years old. And that what impact that would have on a person. And then I started thinking about my father who 19 years old goes from working at the hardware store, driving a Mustang and shooting basketball in the garage to killing Vietnamese people in Vietnam
Yeah.
in a span of 6 months. What is the impact that was on him? What horrors did he see that he couldn't cope with, that drove him to experiment with things that he probably shouldn't have? And I think and so that, and, you know, becoming a young father myself and doing shows where the character I'm playing has children and exploring that, it's always been a thing that there's a lesson for me to learn that is applicable either right now or coming forward. It has definitely been guided by a higher power in my perspective, because there's no way you can get that. You can figure that out yourself. You know, you can schedule that yourself. You're gonna mess something up sooner or later. But I feel like that mechanism and trusting your gift, trusting the gift that has been given to you, and allowing your gift to lead, because it does say that your gift will make a way for you. So, you know, it's definitely a coping mechanism. It's a learning mechanism, like I said, and you know, it can actually be a curse if you don't allow it to develop. And I think that's a challenge that a lot of people face, not only young Black men, but people face, is they have boxed in their gift, much like you mentioned before. You know, they have locked up their gift because they have been told that you have to do this in order to be accepted, as opposed to allowing their gift and their spirituality or their nature to lead them where they should be. They've been told that, you know, you got to be a doctor, you got to be a lawyer, you got to sing in church, you got to be a Christian, you got to be, you know. And so instead of letting their gifts lead, I think that is definitely true, Brother Valencia. And I don't even know if I answered your question. I don't even know if I answered your question, brother.
How do you think we're doing better in tapping into that aspect of ourselves that, you know, we're not being boxed in? Are we making strides of not being boxed in and actually being or becoming or transitioning into who we want to be or who we're meant to be?
As a whole, or?
Yes, us as a whole, as Black men, we look, you know, we're, you know, I mean, yes, we do live in this world, but a microcosm of that world is us, right? So, you know, we want to focus on us. So as Black men, are we making a transition into becoming better with tapping into those aspects of ourselves?
I think we, as Black men, we've always tapped into those aspects of ourselves. The problem is that when we think we're not, is based upon an image that's being presented for us, that's readily available, but not as available as what's actually really going on. I think the powerful images that we see on television of Black men and violence and you know, all of these different negative things are readily presented to us. However, the actuality of it may not be the same. You know, it's oftentimes, I was having a discussion with a gentleman of another persuasion about Black Lives Matter. And, you know, they played the same card that's always played. Well, what about Chicago?
Oh, boy.
Oh yeah, wow. Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's like there's a script that they're reading.
That's,
you know, if this said, make sure you mention Chicago, and you know they tight on them stats from Chicago, man. I was like, they're tight on those stats. They know those stats backwards and forwards. But that is Chicago, and that is definitely a concern. But Chicago is not everywhere. Chicago is not the complete plight of an African-American male in this country. We are, I think, moving towards an ideal of ourselves that is not created by someone else. Much like we were talking about earlier, Valencia, I think we're moving towards that. And once there's a breakout outside of the box or the specific parameters that are put on you, there's a tendency to travel in all directions. But the most important thing is that we're challenging that perspective that's been put on us. We're challenging that box that's been put around us. We're breaking out of that mold that's been created for us. And I think anytime you're doing that and you're no longer allowing someone else to determine what success looks like for you, what greatness looks like for you, I think that is moving in the right direction. I mean, even if you have to travel further to get to the destination, you're traveling on your own. You're traveling with your own mind. It's like Malcolm said, you'd rather see a brother with a processed head and a natural mind than a natural head and a processed mind.
Right.
It's not what's on your head, it's what's in it. So that freedom of thought and that push towards the things they feel gravitated to that are outside of that perspective that is created, I think that is always a move in the right direction.
You know, let me chime in right quick, right? I definitely agree in terms of us going in the right direction, right? My fear and concern is for younger Black men and teens, mainly because of what social media has the potential to do, right? So not only will it show us police brutality, but that algorithm will keep you in a place depending on what you click on, right? So it'll, you know, have, if anybody hasn't seen Netflix, The Social Dilemma,
Yes.
please watch it, right?
Yeah.
Now, I'm into social media, so I know and understand how the algorithm works and stuff like that. First thing that came to me, I noticed, was everyone speaking was white, right? Except for maybe like one guy, I think he might have been Indian, right? So you have, now, especially for me, with getting into this, you know, Black Power and all this other stuff, I'm already heightened, right? So I'm already noticing everything, right?
Right.
So you have, you know, it was pointed out in something I read, I think it was probably Dr. Frances Cress Wessling, that she mentioned that, you know, whites in terms of the global population only make up like 7% of the population, right?
Factual.
Right. So you have a small amount of the population not only controlling the media, but then now they potentially have a control on our psychological development through the use of technology, right? So they get the kids indoctrinated early, because guess what? My son, he'll be 4 in December. He knows what Instagram is. And it wasn't like we were purposely trying to get him on Instagram. I'm like, we'll be on our phone, take a picture here and there. And he's like, oh, can I get on Instagram? And then what happens is they make I'm 43. I'm not putting cat ears on. I'm not using all these faces, but they indoctrinate the kids and teens early. This way they could feed them whatever messaging there is. And then in that documentary with The Social Dilemma, you know, they admitted to tinkering around with different things to see what it did to you emotionally, right? So I know, like, for me, especially since I'm a numbers person, I'm into stats. So I always would post something, whether I was pushing out some self-help content, some religious content, like I was a stickler on stats, how many likes I'm getting, who's hitting, what messages are working. Literally, like my Instagram account, when I went in to check it, the notifications for likes wouldn't go off, right? I would check it and I come back to it, you know, several minutes later, hours later, and the red notification would be there, like I had new likes, and I'll go check it and it's still the same likes from before, right? So I noticed they implemented these little glitches, quote unquote, to keep you going in. And I'm like, this is crazy, right? So although like we're a little bit older and we're kind of able to see what things were prior to social media, we're able to kind of dig into some of the studies and kind of further ourselves as men. Like my concern is definitely for teens, younger men, and kids that have to go through this cycle, right? Because although there's a huge idea and focus on social justice, knowledge of self, and things like that now, they still have to fight against social media technology and what those dopamine hits do to them, right? Because you could be on Black Lives Matter 1 second, and then you could be down a different path another second, and you'll be stuck there for 3-4 hours. And then what it does is, like, if you're not consistently clicking, liking, and engaging content that's meaningful, then your whole feed will look a certain way. And I've noticed that. I've clicked on Nikes 2 or 3 times, and my whole entire feed is sneakers. So now I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not even really a sneakerhead. Like, why am I going to do so many sneakers like that, right? So I'm not necessarily concerned about us who are a little bit older, that we're kind of can unravel some of this stuff, and some of the stuff that we're seeing is sparking us to question, sparking us to grow. But what do you do with a younger mind who may not have a stable environment to where their elders, the men in their lives, maybe even the women, are saying, hey, put that phone down, here's a book, or if you're gonna look at social media, here's the right videos you need to be looking at. So we could kind of plant those seeds early, so even if they don't manifest in their 20s, maybe they'll manifest in their 30s and things like that.
Right. I think that's all of us are fathers, and all of us, we stay on top of social media presence for our kids and what's happening. And I think that's my biggest fear with the pandemic, right? I watch my youngest daughter, she loves to be around people, and it's changed. I could see it's changed her psychologically, where as soon as I have to open the iPad, it's just like, and she's not engaged. Like, the learning process is not happening. And I know that, there are some challenges with the schools and trying to figure the tech out, and sometimes things not working, and it's just sort of like, all right, cool. And then immediately I recognize she's just like, can I watch a video? Because she just wants to be able to just kind of like you said, she just wants to be able to just, relieve the stress of sitting in front of this computer and not learning the way she wants to learn, right? So like, I'm constantly trying to manage that, right? And where I have a son who's super curious, and he's a creative, and he likes to build stuff and all that other stuff, I can watch him zone out immediately. So we have to surround him with things that are going to not just occupy his time, but really feed his mind, because he's the kid that'll just like, that rabbit hole will be 6 hours long, right? Like, and we have to watch that stuff. So all that stuff that you touched on, all that stuff hits home, and hopefully for some of our viewers. So I think we touched on a lot of stuff in terms of creativity and spirituality. I think there's some more stuff to unpack. But if you had an opportunity to talk to one person who may be watching this, what specific message would you like them to know in regards to spirituality and creativity? And anybody can go.
Reader.
I would say seek a personal relationship outside of the parameters of what you think you know or what you've been taught. Seek a personal relationship in a way that explore, seek, make your own discoveries. If you make mistakes, at least they're your mistakes. You're not making the mistakes of someone else that has put them on you. Discover, be curious, seek out the truth of things, observe, and I'm a big believer in not, when you're on a path of discovery, not doing a lot of talking, doing a lot of observing, a lot of listening, a lot of reading, and a lot of deducting on your own. Spiritually, you have been created by someone or something. And how did that happen? Where did that come from? Those are questions you should seek. God is in you. Otherwise, the miracle of your existence you wouldn't be here. So there's an exploration of that you should see. Not what your mother tells you, not what your father tells you, not what, this individual on television or someone from a book tells you. Seek it for yourself. Seek the truth of it and discover for yourself. Ask those tough questions, because there's going to be a lot of questions that you may not want to ask yourself, but you have to know the answer to those questions. So don't be afraid. Just explore and trust.
Absolutely. Mr. Harris.
For me, if it was just like one thing I can sum up, so what stands out to me most, well, not necessarily most, because there's various things. What stands out to me in, let's say, the book of Genesis, the beginning, is what we first see and realize, right? So the idea that God, the creator, creates the universe, heaven and earth, everything like that. And then we're actually made in the image of God, right? So I think we kind of rush past that to get to the Adam and Eve and to get to everything that's happening in Genesis. But the important thing here is being made in the image of God gives us God's attributes. And the first attribute that we know and realize is that God created, right? So what does that mean for us, right? So it gives us the ability to be, when I say create or creative, it's not necessarily about doing things that are fun, but then it's also creating new realities or envisioning new realities for ourselves, our family, and our community, right? Now, the thing about creation is usually we see these stories about Adam and Eve walking through rose petals and creation was beautiful and stuff like that. But if you really dig into science, in terms of creating the universe, planets, Earth, some things are actually beautiful, some things are violent, some things are slow, some things are fast, right? So we can't necessarily be scared, like for us as African Americans, to envision a new reality and then actually also be opening to experiencing not just the beautiful things that are going to happen with pushing for progress, but also the troubles and turmoil that we actually have to go through to create that reality, right? So for anyone that needs, let's just say, creative examples, right? So like I tend to kind of, when I daydream about just so many random things. And like if you think about inventions, if you think about highways and all this stuff like that, they actually mirror things that are actually going on in the universe. So like if you look at our highway, if you look internally, at our veins and our structures, they actually kind of mirror the highway system. So the ideas that people and inventors get, they're not necessarily new ideas. I think they're coming from the universe and coming from the creator. You could talk about, the comparison between a cell phone and speaking to somebody on a cell phone versus us praying to God, and whether or not God will hear us when we speak out into the air, right? So I think everything that we experience as it relates to new inventions, new things actually comes from a creative place, that being the creator. But for us as African Americans, we have to pay particular attention to the idea that we could be more than what we're being fed as it relates to creativity, and actually as it relates to what we perceive to be God and God in us, right? So when we're fed these images, when we're fed a particular message, it shrinks our idea of what God is, but then it also shrinks the reality of what we could actually do as creators, right? So even, and this will be the last thing I can say because I can go on and on about this. So even for me, as I look at my career path, right? For me, you grow up in the hood, you sell drugs, you play basketball, or you just get a 9 to 5, right? So the idea for me was, well, I love sports, like I love computers, those two paths, right? Now, going into computers, I knew I really wasn't gonna love it, but it was drilled home to me that you can't have if you're not gonna be, you can't have a successful path in sports. So you're gonna have to choose a backup plan just in case something happens, right? But guess what? As I become more open to different realities, I circle back to different ideas of what a career in sports looks like, to where now I'm actually, working with youth and doing youth development. And that took, I wish I would have knew it earlier, but that took, like you said, you have to go through from one end of the spectrum to the other. So that took, I stopped playing basketball seriously like 18 years ago. And now I'm just thinking about coaching, right? And it was really what was just kind of drilled home to me as in terms of limiting my beliefs. So anybody watching this, please, please, please understand that you're made in the image of a creator, and there's no limits on your creation and what that possibly could look like, despite what the media, despite what social media, despite what this American narrative actually tells you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Terrell Harris. Thank you
Yep.
very much, Mr. Douglas Scott Streeter. This has been First Generation the Podcast. Have a good night.
Oh, wait.
Cheers.
Is there anything you want us to plug for you guys?
Oh, yeah.
Can we plug the upcoming Beat album that's coming up? What's the title of it?
Title of this next album is dropping Friday on all streaming platforms. Is I Could Do This Too.
Nice.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man. Appreciate it. Thank you for having me. It's been a wonderful experience, much needed for me, man. Like I was in just kind of, you get in a down place, but this connecting like this, speaking about this, it does a lot for me to kind of lift me up. So I definitely appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. Mr. Streeter, what do you have coming up?
I actually have in December, later on in December, stay tuned. I'll be playing Louis Armstrong. It's called Armstrong at the Waldorf. So I'll be playing. But yeah, that's coming up with Pure Theater in Charleston, South Carolina. But it is going to be a Zoom event. So there'll be Zoom opportunities with that. So I'll keep you guys posted on that for sure.
Awesome.
And I'll be back in New York probably next year. Close to around this time, I'll be doing at the Signature Theater, be doing a Shipment again. It's a Black race politics show.
If you guys haven't, is it still on YouTube? Can we still find it?
It's on. So on the boards in Seattle, actually recorded it, and you can actually see it on the website. It might be. I haven't checked it out on YouTube, but you can actually probably see it on Young Gene Lee's channel. Great, phenomenal American, Korean American writer who really pushes the boundaries of everything she does. And so,
If you guys haven't,
check that out. Definitely check that out.
It's a great.
It challenges the lens in which we view the African American men and women in society. So it really attacks that lens that we see my fellow brothers and sisters, and how we place certain stereotypes and perspectives on them just because of the American ideal and how that has affected our perspective. So definitely a good look if you want to check that out. but I'll be doing that again in New York around this time next year. But
Thank you very much, brothers.
Lakers 4-1. Thank you. Lakers 4-1. King.
no problem with that, man. You know, I've become through the years, I've become quite fond of LeBron.
Hey, I got you recorded. I make sure I got you.
Good night. Once again, thank you very much for checking in to First Generation the podcast. I want to thank Mr. Terrell Harris for being insightful. I want to thank Mr. Douglas Scott Streeter for being creative, deep. The brother I always knew he was. That's my man right there. And again, hey, my co-host, Kwabena Duke, the man with all the snow on top, baby. And I'm William Valencia, and I'm out here looking young like a brand new penny. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
All right.